After decades at the top, the Ambassador Bridge has been dethroned as North America's busiest truck crossing. The Blue Water Bridge has taken over the crown, signaling a major shift in cross-border trade.
The Ambassador Bridge is slashing tolls for some drivers nearly in half. According to a breakdown posted on the bridge website, cars and motorcycles crossing with a Premier Pass will pay $5.50 US to cross. That's down from $10 US. The cash rate, though, does remain unchanged, $10 US or $14 Canadian. The new rates go into effect on Sunday. Tolls at the yet-to-be-opened Gordie Howe International Bridge have been set at $4.35 US through a membership program. The Gordie Howe Bridge is expected to open later this spring, but at this point, there is no firm date, at least one that's being announced.
A $6.4 billion bridge started a trade fight before a single truck even crossed it. That sounds ridiculous. But that is exactly what happened when Donald Trump threatened to block the Gordie Howe International Bridge between Windsor and Detroit. For a moment, it looked like one of North America's most important trade corridors was about to become a political hostage. Then the fight started to fade. No massive retaliation, no dramatic Canadian counterattack. Just one phone call, one agreement, and one uncomfortable reality Washington could not easily talk its way around. Because the truth is simple. You can make a political threat, but you cannot easily talk your way out of signed paperwork, shared ownership, and a trade corridor that American factories also depend on. Let's break down what this fight was really about. The Gordie Howe International Bridge is the new crossing between Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit, Michigan. It was built to move heavy freight faster across one of the busiest trade corridors in North America. This is not just a bridge for cars. This is a freight machine, a supply chain machine, a manufacturing machine. It connects directly into the highway systems on both sides of the border and was designed to reduce congestion, speed up border movement, and add something the old system badly needed: a second major route. That matters because for decades, this corridor depended heavily on one old king, the Ambassador Bridge. The Ambassador Bridge was not just another crossing. It was the crossing. It carried auto parts, machinery, manufactured goods, and thousands of trucks through a corridor where components can cross the border multiple times before one vehicle is finished. But there was always a problem. The Ambassador Bridge was not just important. It was dominant. And when one route becomes too dominant, it stops being only infrastructure. It becomes power. That is why the Gordie Howe Bridge changed the equation. It did not just add concrete and steel, it added competition. And competition is exactly what old power does not like. Now, the contract behind the Gordie Howe Bridge was not some secret deal. Back in 2012, Canada and the state of Michigan reached an agreement. Canada would pay the upfront construction cost. That included the bridge, the highway connections, the customs plazas, and the supporting infrastructure. Michigan did not pay the initial construction bill. But Michigan still secured joint ownership and the right to share toll revenues after Canada recovers its costs. So when Washington suddenly suggested America was being shortchanged, the paperwork told a different story. Canada paid up front. Michigan got ownership. Both economies benefit. American workers and materials were involved. And the project had already been approved years ago. That is why Mark Carney did not need to shout. He just pointed back to the agreement. The bridge is jointly owned. The deal is already structured. The corridor serves both sides. And delaying it would not just hurt Canada. It would hit Michigan too. That is the part political noise often hides. A bridge delay does not stop politely at the border. It moves into factories. It moves into auto plants. It moves into trucking schedules. It moves into workers' paychecks. It moves into consumer costs. So the threat may have sounded like Washington pressuring Canada. But in practice, it risked pressuring American manufacturing too. And that is why the fight started losing force. Because you cannot easily frame a shared trade asset as a Canadian takeover when the American side already owns part of it and stands to benefit from it. But here's the part most people missed. While politicians were arguing over ownership, compensation, and old paperwork, the market was already voting with its tires an hour up the road. The Ambassador Bridge was not just being challenged by the Gordie Howe Bridge. It was already being beaten by the Blue Water Bridge. For decades, Ambassador was the busiest commercial truck crossing on the Canada-US border. Then Blue Water, between Sarnia, Ontario, and Port Huron, Michigan, quietly moved ahead. By 2025, Blue Water recorded about 2.1 million commercial truck crossings. The Ambassador Bridge recorded about 1.9 million. That is not a tiny fluctuation. That is the old king losing the crown. And the reason the old king should be nervous comes down to one number, not a billion-dollar construction figure, not a presidential threat, not a political donation. $100. That is the number that started moving trucks. At the Ambassador Bridge, commercial tolls have been much higher for many trucks. At Blue Water, the tolls are far lower. For a standard 5-axle truck, the difference can be around $100 per crossing. Now, $100 does not sound like a trade revolution. One truck, one trip, fine. But logistics companies do not make one trip. They run fleets. They cross every week. They cross every month. They move thousands of loads. So $100 becomes thousands. Then tens of thousands. Then hundreds of thousands. Then it becomes strategy. And that is how trade routes actually change. Not with speeches, with spreadsheets, with dispatchers, with fuel calculations, with driver hours, with toll invoices, and with one question asked over and over again. Which route keeps us moving and costs us less? Increasingly, the answer was not Detroit. It was Sarnia. That is why Blue Water matters. It did not need to make a political argument. It just became the better calculation. Lower cost, smoother routing, less congestion, more predictability. And in logistics, predictability is money. That is the lesson. Trade does not move where politicians say it should move. Trade moves through the path that makes the most sense. And when enough companies make the same calculation at the same time, the map changes. This is where the Gordie Howe Bridge becomes even more important. Because it was built to solve the same problem that pushed trucks away from the Ambassador Bridge. It offers direct highway-to-highway movement. It reduces city congestion. It gives freight a modern crossing. And it creates a publicly backed competitor in a corridor that had depended too heavily on one private bridge. So Blue Water may be winning today. But Gordie Howe could change the equation again tomorrow. That means the Ambassador Bridge is now squeezed from both sides. Blue Water has already taken the crown. Gordie Howe is coming for the future. And the Ambassador Bridge is no longer the unavoidable route it used to be. Once a route becomes optional, it has to compete. Now pause here. Because if this were only about tolls, the story would already be interesting. But it gets more serious when you ask one uncomfortable question. Who benefits if the new bridge is delayed? The Ambassador Bridge is privately owned by the Morone family. For years, its owners opposed the Gordie Howe project because a new public bridge would create direct competition. That does not prove bribery. It does not prove an illegal deal. But it does explain why people started asking questions when Trump threatened to block the new bridge. Because if a public bridge threatens an old private toll empire, then any political attempt to delay that public bridge deserves scrutiny. Who benefits if Gordie Howe is delayed? Who benefits if Ambassador keeps its dominance a little longer? Who benefits if competition is slowed down? Those are fair questions. And they are part of why this bridge fight became bigger than one construction project. It became a fight over who controls the physical routes of trade. Because a bridge is not just concrete and steel. It is a pricing system, a logistics system, a supply chain system, a power system. If you control the crossing, you influence time. If you influence time, you influence cost. And if you influence cost, you influence the route. That is why losing the crown matters. The Ambassador Bridge did not just lose truck volume. It lost its aura of inevitability. It stopped looking like the only serious option. And once that happens, power shifts. So did the US-Canada bridge fight really end? In one sense, yes. The immediate political threat faded because the legal and economic reality was too strong to ignore. Canada had the agreement. Michigan had the ownership stake. The trade corridor needed the bridge. And the paperwork held. But in another sense, the real fight is just beginning. Because once Gordie Howe opens, the entire corridor will be recalculated again. Every trucking company will run the numbers. Every dispatcher will compare tolls. Every logistics firm will weigh time, distance, congestion, and reliability. And if the new bridge offers the better equation, traffic will move again. That is how trade works. Not through noise, through numbers, not through slogans, through routes, not through political theater, through the cheapest, fastest, most reliable path. So here is the real Tradeconomics take. The US-Canada bridge fight looked like another political explosion. But underneath the noise, the real story was already happening. The Ambassador Bridge lost its crown. Blue water proved trucks will move when the math changes. And Gordie Howe is about to force the whole system to run the numbers again. Because the map of Canada-US trade is not fixed. It moves when cost changes. It moves when time changes. It moves when trust changes. And right now, all three are changing at once. So the question is no longer just whether the Ambassador Bridge can fight back. The real question is what happens when Gordie Howe opens and every trucking company runs the numbers again. Because once the old king loses the crown, the whole system starts asking a new question. Who owns the next route? If this breakdown helped you understand what is really happening beneath the headlines, subscribe to Tradeconomics, share this video so others can see the bigger picture, and click the notification bell so you do not miss our next breakdown. At Tradeconomics, we follow the markets first, then expose the power mechanics underneath. See you in the next one.